So my name is Mohammed Fraser Rahim. I'm the executive director for Quilliam International, and we appreciate everyone joining us today for a very timely conversation as it relates to anti-Black racism. Just in terms of background, Quilliam is the oldest counter-extremism organization in the world, established, founded by formers themselves. As you can imagine, we've grown from our days being based in London, United Kingdom, and we have expanded our operations into the United States, where I'm the executive director. And our work is really promoting and championing causes of countering extremism, largely historically dealing with the Islamist threat, those who take a twisted, narrow interpretation of Islam and distort it. And we have expanded our efforts to deal with broader human rights issues that really bring us, or I should say, the collective human spirit together, challenging anti-Semitism, challenging Black racism, as we're dealing with today, challenging against various isms that are out there. And so Quilliam has continued to work on this efforts globally, and during this time of COVID, we haven't stopped, we're continuing it very strong. What I would just highlight, just in terms of a few little housekeeping items before we dive into the substantive, it's important to recognize very much upfront that our work does not, it can't be done just solely on our own. We need the support of you all. And so we have an effort called Quilliam Circle, which is a campaign and effort where we encourage you all, we ask for you humbly to think about it as you have options in your charitable efforts. So we encourage you to think about us. Quilliam Circle is an effort that we have monthly, a contribution just as much you donate to various efforts to various causes that are noteworthy and helpful for humanity. So please consider us. Our website is www.quilliaminternational.com. Now, today's conversation is really, I think, very timely. We really have, for the sake of time, I will encourage you to check out the flyer for this conversation, and you'll be able to see much more background and details about these two wonderful speakers we have. And then I just want to kind of dive into it. But we have Mansour Al-Hadj, who's a writer, human rights activist, born and raised in Saudi Arabia, but of Chadian and Sudanese origin. And then we also have Nimco Ali, who's a well-noted anti-FGM campaigner and humanitarian who is well-known in both in the British scene, but also internationally. And so I think it's a really nice combination that we have a really global conversation that's about to take place. And we really appreciate you all making time. I'm going to frame this conversation, and then I'm going to allow our two speakers to kind of then dive in, and we make this a dialogue. At any time, if you have questions, please submit it via the chat feature. We have our admin folks who will be helping behind the scene, who will help, and I'll be checking my phone. So if it looks down, if I'm looking down, it just means I'm trying to keep tabs of everything. We're going to try to stick to an hour-ish max so that we respect everyone's time. It should be about 6:06 UK time, and it's 1:06 p.m. in the US. So I'll just start off. I think it's important to really start off, how and why we are at this, having this conversation. Right now, all throughout the world, particularly starting in the United States, what happens in the US certainly influences the world. And certainly the incident over almost 2 weeks ago now with George Floyd sparked a conversation that we have seen time in and time out, particularly in the United States of America. And unfortunately, as it's been notated, the original sin of the US, which is unfortunately the slavery and the consequences of slavery. And so we'll get into this within Muslim communities, I think very importantly, but I think it's important to realize that we are here today because of the incidences of individuals taking the life, unfortunately, of many individuals. We all probably have had some individual who've been affected. I've had family members who have been victims of these situations, and we want to be able to address like what happens next, right? And so, I highlight that today just in terms of the context of what's taking place. But I think on top of just the issue of African Americans, there's this larger conversation of Blackness, of the conversation of anti-Black racism within Muslim communities as well. And I think this is important because we have three individuals who will share their experiences. And for me, I'm a generation, my background is as an African-American whose family members converted to Islam decades ago and made the journey to Islam. As we know, many enslaved African Muslims came to the US. Upwards of 40% came through my hometown of Charleston, South Carolina, and many of them came from Muslim lands, from West Africa, East Africa, et cetera. And so for African Americans, particularly growing up, going to Quranic school, being both Black and Muslim, I would have the conversation that came up was, am I Black enough because I'm not Christian? Or the question comes up, am I Muslim enough because I'm not Arab or South Asian? And I'm sure Mansour, I'm sure Nimco have had similar or maybe different or parallel side tracks of issues of question and being challenged of what that means. And so I just tee that conversation up just to recognize we have Blackness represented in many different realms right now who probably share the same issue. And I think that this conversation today is addressing internally on the anti-Black racism that is, I wouldn't just say it's a simple issue. I think it's a pervasive issue that all of us have encountered and still encounter in some shape or in fashion. So the last thing I'll say, and then I'm gonna open it up to Mansour and then Nimco. Actually, we don't wanna have male-dominated panels, so I'm gonna open up to Nimco first, then Mansour. What I would say is that on top of this era of post 9/11 and the era of using the label of Islamophobia or anti-Muslim bigotry, which I think is an issue, if you will. Within Muslim communities, that is not the top issue. I personally think that the racialization of Islam is probably higher of an issue than anti-Muslim bigotry that has taken place and continues to take place. As we know, Black communities have been largely affected. We always, with Pew and Gallup, both two reputable social science research firms, have notated that we always highlight this notion that Muslim communities just in the United States are seen as upwardly mobile and affluent. But we also know within that data similarly that we have, just to give you evidence-based and empirical research, that 40% of American Muslim households have an income less than $30,000 a year. So that means individuals are at or below the poverty line. That means individuals are trying to deal with COVID and how do they get health. That means individuals are trying to deal with police challenges in their communities, not just this sort of pervasive language of the surveillance state or anti-Muslim bigotry, these labels that often are put out there. So I just want to put that out there. I know I'm saying a lot all at once and probably missed a few other things, but I wanted to at least shape the conversation, to at least put this out here in a broader context. And then last thing I didn't mention, which I think is important to tee up as well. I just had a book that came out in January on America's Other Muslims. And we know, unfortunately, that even within the Islamic tradition, that even the close companions of Muhammad the Prophet in the Islamic tradition and others, there has been a historical issue of sort of the racial divide. There's this high standard that I think within Islamic traditions that, and particularly the Prophet Muhammad has highlighted as being exemplary behavior, and particularly his farewell address, not recognizing that the Black is not superior than white, et cetera. But also we've seen individuals and how they describe what is considered beauty, what is considered beautiful, what is considered to be the standard, that in some shape or fashion, it has been less than what my skin looks like, or what your skin looks like, Nicole, or what your skin looks like, Mansour. And I think it's important that we retake that narrative, particularly with those within Muslim communities, and what that means. All right, I said enough. The mic is yours, Nimco.
Well, okay, that's a lot. Thank you for having me. I think this is a really interesting conversation because I think for me, I come from a community which ironically does not classify itself as Black. So the Somali community will say they're Somali, but they're not Black. And then I live in a country where because of the fact that I'm darker, I'm not necessarily seen in the mainstream narrative of being Muslim. So I think the UK is a lot smaller than the United Kingdom. So our issues are not necessarily as deep. And I think the conversations around race and racism are different within communities as opposed to the broader kind of perception. But I think for me, what's been really evident is that when, for me, my main identity as a Muslim is not as a Black Muslim woman, it's more as a Muslim woman who's a feminist. And this idea within the political realm of talking about things like Islamophobia, I find that term really problematic, because a lot of the things that people will define as Islamophobia are the kind of things that secular and feminist Muslim women are really trying to critique. And then when it comes to the conversation of actually identifying Black Muslims in the United Kingdom, that's a very rare conversation, because everybody assumes that Muslims are Asian. So even in the last few weeks during COVID, when it was Ramadan and when it was Eid, and when we were getting the message out to the Muslim community, there were very few Black faces that were getting the message out to the Muslim community. So I think for us, and because of the history of who's migrated here first, I think it was the South Asian community, and then came the Somalis, and then the Arabs, and everybody else has been here as well. It's like the conversation of Islam in the United Kingdom has been very much South Asian, and not even as Arabs, but mostly South Asians are the kind of things that. But when you talk about racism, it's problematic. It's like something that I within my own community as a Muslim child growing up, colorism. So the idea, the fact that as Somalis we were Black, and anti-Semitism were the two things that were very flippantly have been said. And I kind of, in this way, have assumed, my God, we are Black, so what are you talking about? And then, because I don't wear the headscarf, I don't overtly look Muslim on a day-to-day basis. I don't necessarily deal with a lot of the bigotry that Muslim women would deal with, compounded that with being Black. But about 6-7 months ago, I met an African-American gentleman who's living here in the UK. And for the first time in my adult life, I actually started to question my own privilege of what it was to be of the diaspora of East Africa, living in a country like the United Kingdom, and what that meant actually being African or being Black, and being Black and Muslim. So I don't think I've got as much lived experience as Mansour probably has in terms of living in a very racist, Middle Eastern context as it is to live here in the UK, when I'm not an overtly presenting Muslim woman, but I can actually definitely say that there are things within my own community that we are the ones that are the self-hatred in the sense of othering. So the idea that I've always made this joke that, well, not a joke, but as a statement, that my mother would rather me marry a non-Muslim white man than a Muslim Nigerian man, because of the fact that he's a Black man. And the idea of the fact that he could be a Muslim, but I'm thinking, so those are the kind of things that really stick with me as a child, is that the racism within my own, as opposed to the racism that I got from others. And then growing up in the United Kingdom as a feminist, and I think that has been a real narrative. So I'm actually really hoping to learn from you guys and see what you're saying as well. But thank you for having me.
Of course, before I come to Mansour, I mean, this conversation of self-hate and colorism is something that, it cuts across the pond. It's even, look at the skin lighteners that we see that are all throughout, unfortunately, the African continent, the Caribbean, even the United States. There's a popular statement in the US, like light, bright, and almost white, as being sort of the standard. Certainly that shouldn't be the standard that, to the darkest of hues, to the lightest of hues, particularly in Blackness, should be encouraged and celebrated. But it's interesting hearing you say that even within your own community, that sort of level as well.
And it's really interesting that a lot of the African, light-skinned African countries on the continent of Africa happen to be Muslim. So imagine if the Central African countries, which were Christian, were light-skinned countries, then that'd be different. So you've got, I remember that there are certain things that really stand out when we talk about the Arab Spring. And I always used to say to people, where did the Arab Spring happen? Because everything in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia got stopped. The real spring was in Africa, but you have people Egyptians won't define themselves specifically as Africans, neither would Libyans, and Sudanese and Somalis also will say that they're Arab, they're not Black, or they're not African. So it's not necessarily even the skin tone, because I've seen people darker than me that I've assumed that they were lighter than me in this air they carry themselves as not being African, so therefore not being black. So I think for me, it's not necessarily about skin tone, but it's about perception of how you look at yourself. And I think the idea of being called a Muslim and being light skinned then automatically assumes that you are some kind, like all of a sudden not black itself. So that's something that I grew up seeing, and me just looking around thinking, I think when the white person looks at you, they will see a black person. They don't see your religion, unless you're a black woman, obviously, that's wearing a headscarf.
Thank you. We'll come back to that. I'm writing some questions. Mansour.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for having me, Ahmed. I really appreciate this opportunity. For me, when it comes to the issue of Black Muslim in Islamic history, if that's what I would like to start, being born in Saudi Arabia and growing up there, I was always interested in the Black figures in Islamic history, and the teaching of unity between different type of Muslims, you know, being white or black or brown. It was something very positive for me as a black person. Quality and feeling that, you know, learning that from early age, I was very happy to see it. And then comes, you know, when you get deeper into the Islamic history itself, you see there's like Bilal and others being sidelined, being called names sometimes, you know, by some of the Prophet companions themselves. And also when I got in deeper education about Islamic history, I learned that the caliphate has to be from Arabian tribe of Quraysh, and all these issues that, you know, black skin color or dark skin color also associated with sinful people who end up in hellfire, and also whiteness is also connected with people who would go to paradise. And as you can also see, you know, the fascination of the mujahideen, or those who wage jihad by the name of Allah. They are very fascinated by the black-eyed virgin who have been described as white. So I was shocked, and also couldn't reconcile all these contradictions between the teaching and between the practices themselves, you know, within the Islamic historical context. And you know, as I grew up, I you know, it has become clear that it's really hasn't been materialized in Muslim communities. I have seen different form of racism and different type of racism, and even within community, as Nimco said, that, you know, the lighter skin tone, or, you know, people, the self-hate, as you also describe it, has been problematic, you know, for people. And one interesting thing that I found out, especially, you know, comparing between racism in the United States and racism in the Arab world, it's quite interesting to see that the issue is a bit complex when it comes to Muslim and Arab world, since these countries are ruled by dictators, and discrimination and racism for a certain part of the community. So they wouldn't address the real issue, which is the issue of the authoritarian regime itself. So regime like in Saudi Arabia or other countries would allow this type of discrimination or abuse, you know, as you can see, you know, towards women, towards children, and also because it's the community is somehow constructed as a class system, meaning whoever feel superior would oppress those who he or she consider inferior. And this is what you can see, everybody taking some sort of oppression and then channeling it or funneling it to other people whom he considered inferior to him. So there are a lot of issues regarding the anti-Black racism in the Muslim communities, and I really don't know where to start or where to end.
Sure. So I'll pivot. I'm thinking a bit about, let's just dive into this. I mean, I studied in the Middle East, and I studied in West Africa. I studied in Egypt. I studied in Morocco. I lived in government or worked in government and spent a lot of time. And, the assumption is, as Nimco said, I look like a Black man, born a Black man and will die a Black man, right? The assumption was, I remember when I had to go to Israel one time. And this is when I was studying in Egypt. Actually, I was studying in Cairo. Then I went down to Ras Sid, Sharm el-Sheikh, Nuweiba. If you know Egypt, you go up. And then I was at the border, El Arish, about to cross over, stopped at the border for about 10 hours, just very normal for anybody who's trying to get in Israel. Then I finally went in, and I was asking for a taxi driver to let me go to Jerusalem. I want to go to Jerusalem. He says, they assumed, I missed a step. But when I was sitting with the security folks in Israel, they asked me, they said, what's your name? My name's Mohammed Fraser Rahim. They see the Fraser and they said, oh, when did you convert? I didn't convert. Where's your mother from? Where's your grandfather from? I don't know. Where's your great grandfather from? I don't know. Because of the story of the enslaved period of African Americans coming to the US. I finally get out, the cab driver says, hey, welcome to Israel. Where are you from? Jamaica. And it was such an interesting thing, right? I'm getting told this. I'm not assumed, and even working in government, outside government, the assumption is, oh, where are you from? Can I not be American and Black? Can I not be a Black American? Can I not be an African American? And the assumption never was I was an African American and African American Muslim. That's complex, as you all have these complexities. And so I say that because I also remember the assumption that I don't know Arabic. And you hear all the statements of, come on, Abid and Kalu. Our Pakistani South Asian we have just as much racism or supremacy in South Asian Arab communities as we see in white supremacist thought too as well. And I think that's important to highlight as well, that the assumption is just placed on sort of white supremacists as solely the dominant force.
Yeah, and for my people as well, so you have them in like East and North Africans as well. So East and North Africans who don't classify themselves as Black, like I said, will also have those kind of terminology for, and also those are things that you kind of consume, because I think like you, I've had experiences that I was in Dubai, and there was a South Sudanese brother who was there at the airport, or working at the airport, and he spoke to me in Arabic, because obviously I should be speaking Arabic, and I said, oh, I don't speak Arabic, and he's like, why not? Because you're like Somali, whatever. And I said, I'm Black, and he said, oh, do not call yourself Black. And I looked at him and I thought, like, what are you actually saying? Like, don't call yourself Black, as though it was offensive to call yourself Black. So I think we've also assumed that you can't be Muslim and Black. I think that's the most powerful thing that we have to say. The assumption is that we have to win over Black people to Islam, because that will save them from their deviancy and they like just being these like animals, and civilize them. But the idea that there are people like me, like Black people and other Black people that are born to Islam, is a misconception to our own, which is everybody will assume that every Black brother you see in the streets of London that looks like you won't be Nigerian, won't be like Sudanese, won't be born Muslim, but will be a revert that went to prison, and that's where he looked. That's what my community will think, is that he went to prison and he picked up Islam in one of the cells. Yeah. And that's like literally that. So it's not just the South Asians and the Arabs, but it's also within the African continent that Africans assume that Black Muslims are something that we gave them, not something that they had themselves as well.
Mm-hmm. As you know, we have centuries of tradition. There's a beautiful quote by Sheikh Ahmadu, who's a well-known Islamic intellectual thinker in West Africa. He says, I no longer need Baghdad nor Fez. Upon seeing Jollof, I submitted. So the assumption that Baghdad, Iraq, right, and Fez, Morocco as being the center of Islamic thought, no, you have rich tradition in Chad, Mansour, as you know, in Niger, in Nigeria, all throughout the Sahel that really should be seen as equal, if not better. I mean, the fact that we have Arabic that has 3 vowel marks, and then you have Ajami, which is non-Arab, right? Where you have Africans who are able to bring their local languages and then using Arabic script. That was an enrichment on Arabic. And so I think it's I think we've gotten the whole script wrong in many respects. Like in some way that, in fact, people of African descent have always influenced and brought contribution. I mean, even to the point of, we talk about Malcolm. Everyone champions Malcolm as this freedom fighter. His first text was translated into Turkish, and everyone's so proud of it, right? And people see him as this champion Muslim. Dare should I say, and I'm gonna get probably people upset with me about it, but guess what? Malcolm was not even able to get buried in a mosque. He had to get buried in a church, because the Muslim community outside of the Nation of Islam, as in the debate on them being Muslim or not, the Nation of Islam, that these Muslim communities that arrived in 1952, 1965 with the Immigration and Nationality Act, they weren't open their arms to receive him. And I think that that's an interesting moment, that the cherry picking, right? Let's get the Black imam to come in for Black causes. Let's get the Black imam to talk about social justice. Get the Black imam to make us, check off boxes. I mean, for example, in Saudi Arabia, I think they elevated about 5 years ago someone of quote unquote Black heritage as a Saudi, as an imam at the Haramain al-Sharifain, at the holiest sites. And that is, check off boxes to some way compete with the Western world and their advancements toward the Blacks, the Negroes, the colors, however it's being framed, right? And I think that's something there. What do you think, Mansour?
He was also got fired, a few years later. He had also experienced racism on Twitter. Like, people started calling him names, regardless that the fact that he was the Imam of the Haram, at some point. I would really like to touch on this subject, that Africans or Black Muslims have really forgo of their Islamic heritage and also their unique Islamic traditions in favor or because of the influence of the petrodollars coming from the Gulf countries, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. And now, sadly, you see in Africa, Arabian tribal tradition has become part of the Islamic traditions in areas where women had never covered their faces. Now you see in Africa, with that extreme hot weather, you see women wearing the full burqa that is normally something Arabian Bedouin women would wear. And it's really sad, because the influence of money coming from these countries changed people's perceptions of their own identity and their own version of Islam. And instead of capitalizing on that, you can see the Malikis and people who are like the Sufis have been sidelined because of lack of resources. And you see a lot of people who have attained their education in Saudi Arabia or other institutions coming and being supported by these countries, receiving the Wahhabi teachings in Africa. And sadly now you can see the influence is, when you and me, we also do countering terrorism, and we see a lot of terrorists from Niger, Mali, and Mauritania, and all these countries, and mainly because of that influence. So we have been really struggling with that, and sadly also governments in African countries don't really stand up against these governments, because they need their support, their financial support, at the expense of, spreading terrorism and intolerance.
Mansour, I'll remind us that, apparently it's been reported that Abdul Malik Jukdal, the AQIM, Al-Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb, very seasoned extremist, was killed probably it was a couple weeks ago, but the press had just hit the fan. But I remember also, because there was a racial hierarchy within AQIM, you had offshoot groups created, Tawijwa, Tawheed wa Jihad in West Africa, Mujal, because local, quote unquote, Black Africans saw the racial discrimination and they wanted to be involved in the fight. So here we have mainstream society, and then within terrorism communities, they've been discriminated against. So it's such
but you've got that in Somalia. You've got that whole thing between Al-Shabaab and Al-Qaeda. They're literally, it's like the light-skinned ones against the problem. It's a clan-based system. And what's really interesting as well, like as a Somali that also travels across the continent in terms of gender rights, is that you can go to places like Gambia, where it's like Gambia was one of the most interesting places I've been to, because it was like close to 86% is the percentage that they say that they are Muslims, but they still had their traditions. They still, like, there wasn't any burqas, like they had their clothes, they had actual culture. And one of the key things is the fact that we're talking about money that's coming into these countries like Somalia, whether it's even like South Sudan, wherever it's coming into in these like failed countries, it's coming in as Muslim aid, as like my brother trying to help you. But it is political warfare. It is the fact that they are trying to stabilize, trying to control people there. Turkey has a massive interest in Somalia at the moment because of the access to the port. And it's saying, but I'm your Muslim brother. I'm the one here to help you. So when the US and the UK step in, or any of these countries that want to bring in democracy and really stabilize the region, they're like, oh, look at the kafirs, look at these people are coming to attack you. So even though this idea, or the fact that they're giving aid or they're supporting, they're actually not, they're setting up political alliances and really bringing up, they're creating hotbeds. And about a week and a half ago, there was a plane full of Pakistanis that left Somaliland, which is the northern part of Somalia. It had over 300 clerics on there. Somalis don't speak Arabic. These Pakistanis don't speak Arabic. So I was saying to myself, what kind of Islam are they teaching them? Like, nobody asks these questions because you can't ask questions, because we're all one ummah, we're all one brotherhood. And I was thinking, no, I don't really want these men from Pakistan in, and everybody assumes that I have an issue with Islam or have an issue with the clerics. No, I have an issue with 300 men that are dressed in a certain way, coming to a country which doesn't speak any of the languages which these other country people speak. What is the conversation that is being had? So even under this disguise of saying we're not Black, we're your Muslim brothers, that is how terrorism and how these things are really steeping into East Africa specifically, and that only impacts women, really, for me.
It's so interesting you say this, and then we have a few questions I want to get to that the audience has. I'm looking at you, Nimco, and you could be a cousin of mine. I'm looking the way you have your scarf, and and I have family members who don't wear any scarves at all, right? And I think that is so interesting, because my mother would, I'm laughing because my mother would never put on a niqab, because the type of agency she has, she is like, nope, I'm a Black woman from the American South. I have dealt with segregation. I have dealt with Jim Crow laws, and I'm not going to move from, there's a sort of internal lore, a joke that says, we're not going to move from the back of the bus to the back of the camel. And I think that that's an important thing too, as well, that, true liberation comes when you aren't beholden to someone else's thoughts or perspective, that you can do things on your own terms. And I think out of all that's coming about out of this, particularly with, that post-COVID, and then certainly with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, et cetera, is this, I think, African people of African descent and Muslims recognizing more broader solidarity and also needing to step up. Because when you turn on TV, the pundits who speak for Islam aren't necessarily having the same hue that all of us are having on here. And their perspectives and their issues and concerns, though Islam, when it came to the US, were from individuals coming from Africa, period. And they brought with them a form of Islam that was balanced, despite being on the plantation and affected by, who were whose name were Fatimir, and owned by Thomas Jefferson and some of the founding fathers of the United States. So, I just say that as I'm listening to you, you remind me of, post the critique, what is to be done, right? And I think that that's important just as much as well.
I think we need to learn, and I think we need to, like, even through my ignorance, I was raised as a Sunni Muslim, and I didn't know anything about I didn't know about Shia Islam until the second war in Iraq happened. I was like, what's that about? So it's like, even like in our own, like, it's like really, I think one of the biggest, one of the gifts about Islam is the ability to be able to read and know your text and know your faith and be judged upon your own kind of things. But we're trying to create cults and sects and sets and all, like, and put that against each other. So I think the art of dialogue has been lost. And as soon as we start throwing words, like, that's why I'm really concerned about words like Islamophobia, or the idea of like trying to protect, like, the Muslim population is not a race. I think that's one of the things is the fact that you can't say like anti-Semitism. The Jewish people are Jewish people. They are that is a race. Islam is not about a race. It's about a faith, and the way that you interpret that is on a personal level, and sometimes it can be in a community, in a household. So I think those are the kind of narratives that I really want to be at the forefront, because I don't normally wear a headscarf. I've been in quarantine, so I've got quarantine hair, but I thought I'd be on a Muslim webinar, so I'll get a headscarf on. So it's those choices that I can make, but it's but for me, I think as someone that is like, I'm proud of my faith and I'm proud of my culture and I'm proud of the community that I come from, but I also know there's massive issues that we have within that community that I would never have two men like, there are no two men like you in my family. I think that is the whole thing, is the fact that as a faith that is meant to be accepting of all, we are sometimes the least accepting within our silo community. So be it Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Indian, and what, like, I think that is quite problematic, is the fact that we pretend to, and the only people that are calling themselves one big family are the ones that are doing this very Wahhabi narrative interpretation of our faith, really.
I have a few questions for you. I'm just going to read off. One is, why do many Arabs call people by the name Abd? We talked a little bit about that. Maybe you can answer that. Another one is there a similar level of is there association of Black Muslims with criminality also present in Saudi Arabia and also other Gulf countries? Do they have that same dynamics? This is the question. And then the last one, just for you all to consider, how would panelists respond to the idea that at the heart of the dehumanizing social practice is different levels of value on people, which we can then internalize? So I don't know if you want to, you can pick as you like, but just to answer those questions.
Yeah, what was the last question?
Yeah.
You can talk about the Arab.
Yeah, the last one was just on how do panelists deal with the heart of dehumanizing social practice is different levels of value on people. I guess, the valuing of different people more than others, probably in this context of based off of race. I mean, you look at Mauritania, we still have slavery there, right? And, Muslim countries are still enslaving people. I went to Howard University, so, all my professors said enslave because they, to say slaves, they didn't have the option, they didn't have the choice, enslave. That's my better term, so sorry.
Well, there's in slavery here in London, so I think, do you know what? I think that's the inhumanity that I see in countries that, call themselves Muslim and, hold people to a higher, a higher platform, is that in the Middle East, like even like the World Cup in 2022 or whenever this World Cup is going to be in Qatar, it was built on slave labor, and we will have the issue with China having slave labor, but we won't have the issue with Qatar or Saudi Arabia or Dubai's glistening malls and everything else was built. And I think I find the inhumanity within the Arab community on non-Arabs quite not even fascinating, but it's just really shocking. And there was I'm not sure if it's 100% true, but I wouldn't put it past them, that the fact that rich Middle Eastern, men and women are buying the organs of the Chinese Muslims that are in prisons because those organs are halal because they haven't eaten pork. I'm like, like those are the kind of things that is happening within our own kind of like faith in our own communities, and then we have the racism and everything else. So I just think, like, you know, as Muslims, I don't think we can hold ourselves to a higher moral ground than I think something like the Vatican, which has like massive issues with child abuse and all these other things. But that's just going on a different tangent and saying that sometimes when men lead all religions, it becomes a little bit problematic. Well, that's a different story.
Yeah, definitely. Mansour?
Yes, in regard of Arab communities or Arab countries or the Gulf countries dealing with criminalizing Black people, it's quite obvious, and I don't think they hide it. I mean, the treatment is different, the way they are portrayed in the media is different, the way people address the issue of crimes committed by Black people is completely different as well. So I helped the Human Rights Watch in 2005 or 6 to write a report about the situation of the Chadian community in Saudi Arabia. I was there when the Saudi government, I'm just going to give you an example, one example, the Saudi government kind of literally demonized the Chadian community as a whole. You know why? Because one person, one young Chadian was involved in was part of a terrorist organization. He was a teenager, he was born and grew up, went to Saudi school, and then got radicalized. And guess what? The Saudi response to that was criminalizing the entire community, more than 100,000 people, stopping renewing their residency card, and yanking all the kids from school. So Chadian kids were not allowed to go to school. They didn't have their paper renewed. The student who study abroad cannot go. People got fired from their jobs. And they passed out some polls and some paperwork dehumanizing the specific group of Chadian community. It just tells you that, you know, even though it's considered or it calls itself, you know, an Islamic country, they find it completely fine, you know, when it comes to ill treatment of communities, and especially people, dark-skinned people or Black people. I'm not saying people from Bangladesh, India, or, you know, in other parts of the world are not discriminated against, but I'm saying there are a lot of multiple level of discrimination, and this is one of it. And, you know, it's sadly, this is how it is. And one more thing I want to say about the protests in the US and after the George Floyd horrible killing, it's really united a lot of people in the United States, especially people coming from Africa. And I was really fascinated to see South Sudanese and North Sudanese all condemning, all saying Black Lives Matter, whereas when we were going back to Sudan, the South Sudanese suffered the most. Yeah. By whom? By mostly people from North Sudan, because, you know, here in the US, you know, white people see one color, you know, when it comes to darkness. But back home, if your hair is a different type, if your nose is a different type, if your name is a different type, you will get a different treatment than somebody who is, you know, has a different hair texture type or the way they look. So people can identify you and at the same time give you, treat you based on that. So, and after the George Floyd, I'm part of a lot of WhatsApp groups, and I see the solidarity is really amazing and impressive, which I really something that I would like to see back home, you know, or in Saudi Arabia, Sudan, or in other countries.
It's interesting you say this, because I think what is also brought to the forefront is better collaboration. Because if I can put the elephant out in the room, I think there has been some historical tensions by some between African and African American communities too as well. Most of it's just ignorance, lack of informed understanding of what the plight, the challenges. And so, you know, in the moment of George Floyd, yes, we're all Black, we're all under the banner, but there has been, I mean, my friends who are from the continent have said, you know, point blank to me, like, well, you know, you're different. You're not that type of African American, you know? And I think that no, in fact, we all are George Floyd in many respects, right? We share the same background, and his plight, his experiences, his pathway was different as a result of what took place and prior to that, but we share a similar, at least, background coming with our origin being from.
Well, do you know what? I think that does a disservice to the African American struggle to say that the Africans from the continent. So I always use the example of Obama and like the two Obamas, so Michelle Obama and Barack Obama. Barack Obama was born to an African man that came to America, who didn't have almost 200 years of historical struggle, because I think there's a difference between the history and the trauma you carry, and your story and the story which you live. So the idea of the fact that Michelle Obama is angry, if Michelle Obama had been the male in that relationship and had been an African American, she would have never got elected, because with the ease and some of the things that he says are the same things that before the George Floyd incident, a lot of Somalis and even a lot of older Somalis are still saying, with the fact that, but they're criminals, so they've kind of bought into the whole narrative, which is also the experience of when Iman was on the cover of Vogue. So it took almost like 30 years for a Black African American woman to be on the cover of Vogue, and then as soon as Iman came on, they were like, well, she's just a white woman that's dark, because her features were different. So I think we have to not just, we are standing in solidarity together, but also we have to accept. So I have to accept my privilege of, like, you know, like, I don't have the history and the experience that the African American community has had, and then also my experience is one of like civil war and currently being oppressed. So yeah, I just want to say that I think
that's spot on, and I think, you know, it's interesting because, you know, despite all that I do, I still get stopped.
Yeah,
you know, at least 3-4 times a year. That's just the reality that I've had since I first started driving.
And that's where your grandparents are. But the whole point is that the Somali, the Sudanese, whatever, can go to a land where he can tell to the police officer, like, he can be the white man in America, in somewhere else. So I think I have to constantly always, like, because Ayan Hirsi Ali said something today, and I said, it is not our place as Somalis to actually undermine the oppression that we will never understand, even though the people are Black. It's just, so this assumption that just because I'm Black, I can say, oh, America's the best place to be a Black person. I was like, mate, I don't have 250 years of being oppressed and enslaved and raped and abused. So I can't say what that is, and I can't say what the trauma that the African Caribbean community is carrying. I can condemn people that do criminal activity, but to just to say that we're on the same, like, kind of fight is not. You guys have been in it deeper, and we need to stand with you. And I think the children would now be in the same fight together, but ultimately the African American experience is one that cannot be wholesalely moved around the world. It's your experience, and it's something that's completely different to how we live in the West or even on the continent of Africa. So I just wanted to say that, because I think you constantly want to say that it's our, like, no, you guys, like, we have to stand with you. It's not about us assuming that we experience the same struggles.
So
yeah, I would like to see it like differently, because we all have different experiences, and I have a lot of African American friends, some of whom I really disagree with, some of whom don't really want to be associated with Africa. They would say, we're just American, we're not African American. You are African, you know, pointing out to me. But there are levels for the struggle everybody goes through. And I mentioned to you today, you know, being Black and having an Arabic name also gives you a different layer of experiences that people with normal English names would not, you know, would not experience in their lives. So it depends. But what I would like to say is that we are all in this together. And to me, as you said, you know, the opening of this, that the whole world react whenever something happens in the US. You know, you see even racist people who express racism on a daily basis. You know, they find themselves they find themselves obligated to really react to the death of the killing of George Floyd. And what I would like to see is the same reaction to our Black struggle, you know, African American, Black people struggle in the Middle East by people who are in the United States, because it's one thing, you know, that to defend or to stand up for injustice here, but if we don't see this as a collective effort for all of us to really, whenever there is injustice, and you know, if we trying to just address anti-blackness, I really would love to see a lot of the organization here, celebrities, doing that part of the work, because you know, with the awful treatment of Black people in Saudi Arabia, you see Black singer from the US would go there.
Yeah.
You know, do not even recognize, you know, that Black people there are really mistreated, and you know, somehow there are a lot of things to really address about this, but I would, as I said, I would like to see a lot of solidarities from our brothers here, but I think it starts from us, by accepting ourselves, loving ourselves, and speaking up against discrimination that we face in the Middle East and Africa.
You know, as we have these last few minutes left, I was thinking about, you reminded me of, this is maybe about 15 years ago, I was in the East Coast, in the West Coast, and you know, the Friday sermon that was being offered, the imam was, you know, asking for God to protect the Muslim Ummah, and of course, it then went to protect the Muslim brothers in Palestine, in Afghanistan, et cetera. And so I always stop and like, why can't we talk about what's happening, the famine in Somalia, what's happening in the Sahel? What can you do? All these different elements, and I think that the cherry picking. And so, you know, I think that this, you know, hopefully this moment is one, being solution oriented. How do we move forward? How do you have better training at these mosques? How do you have communities, these Arab, South Asian, Desi communities, be more from even African communities? How can they be much more aware what's taking place, looking at their own conscious and unconscious bias too as well, and that impact. So I don't know if you all have any final thoughts, but to me, it has to be implemented at a policy level, at communities, at mosques, and also including women not just being in dungeons and basements, right? But equal footing and doing it in a fair, transparent way, and being truly transformative. So, floor is yours. Mansour, or Nimco, maybe if you want to make some comments, and then Mansour.
Yeah, no, when you just said about separating, I think we have to celebrate the spiritual and the political. I think a lot of Islam, I've not been to a mosque that has not been political. So both Syria and Palestine are political Muslim causes. Like,
come to America, I will show you something different.
Yeah, no, but that's what I mean. You know what? It's really weird. Like, when I go to America, like you guys all like, and everybody's evangelical, and so the whole point is like, I'm one of those kind of like, I'm an eclectic Muslim. I collect you all, but it's fine. So I'll definitely come. But no, I think it's like somebody tweeted the other day and said, like, you know, the Palestinian struggle is not a Muslim struggle; it's a struggle about freedom. And then all these people blew up, and they weren't even Palestinians. And then the Palestinian person brought back and said, imagine trying to do a Black Lives Matter movement. It was interesting. They said a Black Lives movement without Black people. So that is the thing about when you say about Palestine and Syria. I've never, like a lot of the Syrians that I speak to are more are secular, well-educated people about Islam, and their conversation has nothing to do with Islam. Their conversation to do about bringing down a dictator. So when these people in the mosques are praying for something, they're actually shouting about their political allegiance as opposed to really talking about their faith. So I think we have to start having conversations and going back to teaching the principles of Islam. Like, are you my Muslim brother or are you not? So rather than saying, are you a conservative, are you a Democrat, are you this, are you, what are you? Like, those are the kind of conversations. It's just like everybody just assumes that you're one thing. So for me, I think it would be to separate the spiritual from the political.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, someone made a good point about Palestinian Christians. You're right. So the secular cause. I mean,
Yeah, it's a freedom fight. It's the same
exactly.
as it's in Syria. So
Yeah.
when you're praying for the Muslims,
it's not a religious issue per se. You know, if someone wants, they can engage. That's not a religious issue where, you know, everyone's uniting over something. So point well taken. Thank you, Nimco. Mansour.
I have written a series of articles about Blackness in the Arab and Muslim world, and in them I really touched heavily into self-love and self-acceptance, because if Black people in Arab and Muslim community are not embracing, you know, their color and their features and their hair, you know, you see a lot of bleaching in a lot of this community. You see a lot of relaxation for hair. You see a lot of, you know, distancing themselves from their own self-hate, as you can call it. And unless we start there teaching our kids, there's a really very sad video on Twitter a few years ago surfaced of a child, 3 years old, being bullied, or 4 years old, she's being bullied in school because she's has a dark skin and her hair is short. And she was telling her mom that people are telling me, you know, I'm Black, I'm ugly. And her mom was calming him down, but this is the narrative, this is the notion, this is what's going on. And unless, you know, start with the family and start with people speaking up, start with people acknowledging that, you know, their skin is beautiful, their features are beautiful, their hair is beautiful, and they should accept it, they should love it, and they should embrace it and be proud of it. Unless we do that, it would be really a long way to go for Black communities in Arab and Muslim.
So there was a delay. Sorry, Mansour. There was a delay a bit.
I really think that comes with education, that comes with connection, and
No, I was saying, sorry, there was a delay on the response. I thought he had stopped, so my apologies. So I just want to thank Mansour and Nimco for, I think, a great conversation. We stuck to our time. We didn't do, as they say, Muslim time, which is over.
I've never heard of Muslim time. I've only heard of Black time. So that's
what Black time. See, Black time. Yeah, Black time. That's what I really wanted to say, Black time. But I want to thank everyone. We have these events. We're doing almost bi-weekly now. So please tune in. I'm sure there'll be a lot more collaboration between all three of us in the future. As I mentioned from the beginning too as well, please consider us as you think about different causes to support during this time. And again, we look forward in sometime in June and beyond. So thank you, and we will talk soon.
Thank you.